Welcome to the Theology Made podcast. I'm Jordan. In today's episode, we're going to look at why smart people still fall for cults. You didn't choose most of what you believe. You think you did. That's the terrifying part. Over 900 people died in Jonestown in 1978. And when researchers went back through the records, the membership files, the testimonies of survivors, they didn't find a congregation of desperate, uneducated people with nowhere else to go. They found nurses, teachers, social workers, people with college degrees who had read widely, thought carefully, and chosen deliberately to be there. They weren't stupid. They were true believers. And that distinction is going to wreck you before this episode is over. Let's go back to 1954, a small town in Illinois. A woman named Dorothy Martin, housewife, devoted churchgoer, totally ordinary, starts receiving what she believes are transmissions from an alien civilization. And the messages are specific. A great flood is coming December 21st. The planet will be destroyed, but a flying saucer will rescue the believers. She builds a following. Educated people, a physician, college students, people who quit their jobs, sell their homes and their relationships, all in, because they are certain. December 21st comes. As you can imagine, there's no flood, no saucer, nothing. So here's what you'd expect. That they would walk away. They'd be embarrassed, quietly rebuilding their lives, pretending that never happened. But here's what actually happened. Their belief got stronger. A psychologist named Leon Festinger had infiltrated the group. He was watching, and what he documented became one of the most disturbing findings in the history of human psychology. Published in his 1956 book, When Prophecy Fails, he called the mechanism cognitive dissonance. And what he really found was something closer to a law of nature. The more you're invested in a belief, the harder your brain works to protect it from evidence. Not because you're weak, because you're human. But here's where it gets strange. Festinger's discovery wasn't just about cults. He wasn't writing a book about weird people doing weird things. He was describing something universal. He was describing you and me and every smart person who has ever doubled down on something they probably should have questioned. Because the cult isn't the problem. The cult is just the extreme version of a mechanism we all run on. Your brain doesn't process reality. It curates it. Neuroscientists have developed what's called the predictive processing model. The idea that your brain is constantly generating predictions about what the world is and then filtering incoming information through those predictions. You think you're seeing the world, you're actually seeing your model of the world every single day, which means this: the more coherent your belief system, the more invisible its walls become. Smart people aren't protected from this. Smart people are more vulnerable to it because they're better at building internally consistent arguments for whatever they already believe. Intelligence without self-examination is just a more sophisticated way to stay stuck. Now, I want to talk about church history for a second, because this is where it gets theologically dangerous. The early church had a problem. Well, several actually, but one you don't hear about enough. It wasn't persecution. Persecution actually made the church stronger. Historians have documented this repeatedly. Tertullian, writing in the late 2nd century, observed that the blood of martyrs was seed. The early Christians who died for their faith didn't produce a shrinking movement. They produced witnesses, and witnesses produced converts. Persecution backfired on Rome. No, the real existential threat came from the inside, and it had a name: Gnosticism. And Gnosticism wasn't a fringe movement run by obvious lunatics. It was sophisticated, intellectually seductive. It attracted the educated, the philosophical, the spiritual hungry. Figures like Valentinus, one of the most influential Gnostic teachers of the 2nd century, was said to have been considered for Bishop of Rome before his theology diverged from the mainstream. It attracted people at the center of educated Christian life, not its fringes. Gnosticism offered secret knowledge, gnosis, available only to those enlightened enough to receive it. Sound familiar? Every high control group in human history has used the same architecture. You're special. You have access to what others don't. Leaving means losing that. Irenaeus, a 2nd century bishop, one of the most underrated figures in church history, spent his life countering this. His work, Against Heresies, written around 100 AD, is essentially a manual on how belief systems manipulate intelligent people. And he noticed something that modern psychologists wouldn't formally document for another 1800 years. Heresy doesn't sell itself as heresy. It sells itself as the real version of the truth you already hold. And that's not even the real problem. The real problem is that this mechanism doesn't require a cult leader. It doesn't require a charismatic figure with a compound and a rule book. It just runs automatically, quietly. In your reading habits, your social feed, your friend group, the podcasts you choose, including, yes, even this one. Every system of meaning you inhabit is shaping what questions you think to ask. Every system. You don't just absorb beliefs, you absorb the questions that feel worth asking. And once you've absorbed a system's questions, you will only refine answers to that inside that system. The walls are invisible because they're made of what feels obvious. This is what the philosopher Charles Taylor described as the social imaginary, the background sense of reality that we all swim in, that we don't question because we don't even notice it as a choice. It's not indoctrination in the dramatic sense, it's something quieter and more total than that. It's the water you're drinking while you debate the taste. And here's where theology offers something psychology alone cannot. The Christian tradition, at its best, not at its worst, has always been obsessed with this problem, not because it's intellectual entertainment, because it treats it as a matter of spiritual life and death. The early church councils were not bureaucratic exercises. Nicaea in 325, Chalcedon in 451, these were gatherings of bishops who understood that the object of belief is not a neutral thing, because you become like what you worship. And that idea runs through the Psalms, through Paul's letters, and through the early patristic writers. What you fix your attention on over time forms you, reshapes you. Belief isn't just content you hold, it's a force that holds you. And this is why the question of what you believe matters less than most people think. And the question of how you hold your beliefs matters more than almost anyone's willing to examine. Because you can hold orthodox theology the way a cult member holds their leader's words, without examination, without genuine encounter, without the terrifying openness that real faith actually requires. Or you can hold almost any tradition with the kind of genuine humility that remains teachable, that can be wrong, that welcomes challenge, that doesn't need to protect itself from questions because it isn't afraid of them. The cult isn't defined by its doctrine, it's defined by its epistemology, by whether the belief system contains a mechanism for its own correction. But here's the pause that most people aren't willing to take. What's the mechanism in yours? Not your theology or your politics or your philosophy, but your actual operating system, the one running underneath all those. Does it have a self-correction loop, or has it simply gotten very good at explaining why every challenge is actually proof that you are right? Jim Jones started his ministry in Indianapolis in the 1950s as a genuine racial integrationist. At a time when that was very costly, he integrated his congregation when almost no white pastor in Indiana would. He worked in civil rights. He cared, or at least something in him did once. And that's not an excuse, it's a warning. The drift from truth isn't usually a single dramatic fall. It's 1,000 small adjustments, each one feeling justified, each one making the next adjustment easier until one day you're somewhere you never intended to go and you built an entire architecture of reasons why this is exactly where you're supposed to be. The most dangerous beliefs aren't the ones that feel obviously wrong. They're the ones that feel like coming home. There's a word in Christian theology, metanoia, usually translated repentance, but the Greek means something more radical than the English word implies. It means a change of mind, not just regret, a reorientation of the entire perceiving self, a restructuring of how you see, not just what you see. The New Testament writers used it to describe the beginning of faith, which suggests something uncomfortable. The entrance to genuine belief isn't more certainty. It's the willingness to have your perceiving apparatus fundamentally rearranged. That's not a crisis of faith. That's what faith looks like when it's working. The reason smart people fall for cults isn't that they're secretly stupid. It's that intelligence is a tool, and tools serve whoever holds them. A sharp mind in the service of a closed system does not produce clarity. It produces a more elegant prison. What protects you isn't IQ. It's not even theological literacy. It isn't even a good church, a good community, or a good podcast. What protects you is the genuine, uncomfortable, ongoing willingness to ask, what would it look like if I were wrong? Most people ask that question rhetorically. They're asking it like a lawyer who already knows the answer, trying to demonstrate fairness while the verdict was decided hours ago. The people who don't get swallowed by cults, ideologies, by the quieter gravitational pulls of tribes and comfort and identity are the ones who ask it like they mean it. Dorothy Martin's group eventually dissolved. She moved, changed her name to Sister Phaedra, went on to found a new spiritual organization, still channeling transmissions, still gathering followers, right up until her death in 1992. She never stopped believing. And I don't think she was uniquely broken. I think she was doing what all of us do, just more visibly, building a home inside a story that made her feel known, chosen, significant. That need isn't pathological, that need is universal. And the question isn't whether you'll find a story to live inside. The question is whether the story you're living inside is big enough to tell you the truth about yourself. And that question doesn't have a clean answer, it has a practice. Thanks for listening to the Theology Made podcast. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe on whatever channel you're listening on.